All right, today we are going to be covering the emotional drivers behind shingles. Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm your host, Heather McKean. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, download, comment, all those things. It really helps us to continue to create all the great content for you and others. And it lets us know if we are meeting the needs of our community. So shingles, also called herpes zoster, is a disease that triggers a painful skin rash. They say it's caused by the same virus as chickenpox, and research shows that about 1 in 3 adults who've had chickenpox in early life will develop shingles later in life. Now, it can appear anywhere on the body, but it typically appears on only one side of the body or the face, and it can have burning, shooting pain, tingling, itching. Those are some of the early signs of the infection. And I've even known a person who had it like inside, deep inside of their ear. And so it can be really almost anywhere, it sounds like. And after the rash is gone, the pain usually resolves. But I've known people that have had it for months, and I've heard cases even where the pain continued, the nerve pain from the shingles continued for years. Now, while the exact trigger for shingles is unknown, doctors say it usually comes from some kind of stress. Go figure. Now, this condition is particularly interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's the reoccurrence of a childhood illness. Now, that's relatively uncommon. And when we're looking at that from a mind change perspective, I feel like that gives us really great insight into the fact that past emotional drivers from childhood are likely getting triggered in adulthood. And that's being manifested by this reactivation of the virus. Now, another interesting thing is that the virus usually happens on one side of the body or the other. So again, from a mind change perspective or a mind-body perspective, this gives us even further information on whether the held trauma might be masculine or feminine in nature. Also, the location of the rash further narrows down the particular messages from the body. Now, because I can't cover both sides and every location where shingles could appear, I'm just going to be giving kind of an general overview of shingles. But I will also be covering some of the emotional drivers behind chickenpox, because that holds some clues to what we might be seeing getting triggered in adult years. So first, let's start off with chickenpox. Now, the primary driver behind chickenpox is feeling restricted, repressed, suppressed, or trapped. Now, this makes a lot of sense if you think about the general age in which children, develop chickenpox. So it's usually between like 9 and 12. And of course, it can be earlier and it can sometimes be a little bit later, but that's generally the age. Now, that's an interesting age considering brain development at the time and also just what's happening in children at the time, which is really this desire to start developing some sort of self-identity or autonomy. And so it might make sense why the child is perceiving a little bit more, maybe control, a little bit more suppression. And oftentimes parents struggle during this time. It's that bridge between taking care of every need that a child has and us being very involved to them starting to become their own person. And so that can actually trigger a lot of stuff in adults who have repressed trauma or maybe who are just a bit dysregulated anyways. So back to children, this getting triggered. So oftentimes when a child is struggling for independence, so they may feel irritated by their current environment or their primary relationships, oftentimes in the family, primary caregivers. It's also possible that they're feeling overly controlled. So when a child tries to assert some autonomy, that's actually met with anger or punishment or shame. It's also possible that it could be a response to a type of hypervigilance in the child. Maybe they live in a chaotic environment or an unstable environment. And this child, as a coping mechanism, has developed this hypervigilance. And that hypervigilance, what that's doing is trying to help them perceive disaster or problems or something, some sort of chaos before it happens so that the child can be more prepared. Now, obviously, I think we know that oftentimes the worry or the vigilance for disaster or catastrophe or anything like that actually causes a lot of issues within our body. But for children, this is their best case scenario, is to try to see things happening before they get there. And so that creates a nervous system hypervigilance. And so in that actually can affect the immune system, and that can make us more susceptible to various viruses. Chickenpox is a virus that happens to be very well spread within that age group, or at least it used to be. I don't really hear about it that much anymore. Back when I was a kid, I know that that was the case. So back to the drivers, there's a lot of fear in this particular child or instability in the family of origin. It could be also that one or both of the primary caregivers or parents are engaged in self-destructive behaviors, and that also is causing a survival response in the child. Another driver could be that the child's mother might find motherhood challenging, and she's questioning her ability to balance everything. The mother might suffer from low self-esteem or be anxious or worried. Now, that's pretty common. So is chickenpox, right? So not every child gets chickenpox. Not every mother feels worried or anxious or like maybe she wasn't meant to be a mother, but it is quite common. So these are not things to feel guilty or shamed about. I know I felt that at times, given my history and my past. And so it's not that because the mother was this way, that was why the child got chickenpox. It's more just what happens to the immune system when a child perceives or receives a high amount of stress for various reasons. And that also can vary on the predisposition of the child. So going back to another driver for chickenpox is that the feeling that you have to fit in to very specific expectations so that you don't rock the boat or be judged. So this is maybe feeling like you're constantly being watched or observed by your parents or by other adults. And the reason for the close observation is they're just waiting for you to do something wrong. So there's more, but I'd say those are the most common drivers for chickenpox. And again, you can see that these are not abnormal things that children may be feeling in good homes, in what we might call normal environments. But also chickenpox is sort of a normal thing that happens. It is more susceptible to those with a lower immune response, but we know that stress can lower our immune response. So a lot of this really makes sense. So now let's transition into looking at the emotional drivers behind shingles, which is the reactivation of this chickenpox virus, if you will. And a lot of the times, it's the same drivers that we saw in childhood, but now they're being translated into more adult situations. So for shingles, it could be that a challenging life experience in adulthood might be revealing unhealed wounds from childhood, because you are, in effect, having a childlike reaction to a hard situation. Now, shingles represents the feeling of being victimized or unprotected. So let's say maybe you're in a job or you're in a relationship where you might be feeling judged or ridiculed or pushed aside. So someone who matters to you is making you feel unimportant or making you feel like your needs are not worth meeting. So this can trigger judgment, shame, or guilt within you that's already there from childhood. And it's really like guilt or shame or judgment around the fact that you want more or that you feel like you need more. So we all have unmet needs. We all have current needs. And we usually are in relationship and connection with others. And there's an exchange of need meeting. But oftentimes when needs were unmet in childhood, that hole, that gap carries with us into adulthood. And we will find that we recreate these relationships in adulthood to show that this is still something that's missing inside of us. And so it does that so that we will rectify that. We will heal that wound or mend that bond, if you will. But most of us, again, we've not been taught this. We don't know the language of the body. So we just keep trying to get a new job or get a new relationship or cope in some way. But that's really what's happening. So another driver is that you might be doubting your value, maybe within your friend group or your family structure or a work environment. So again, that unmet need kind of keeps showing up, and it affects the filters that we intake all the information from our environment. So is it necessarily true that your friend group is ostracizing you, outing you? I mean, it could be, but oftentimes it's the perception of that because we are looking through a lens of that being something that has happened to us in the past, or again, within the family structure or a work environment. Oftentimes in the work environment, there's an authority figure. And because of something that has happened, maybe in the past, an authority figure or an influential person was dominating or disrespecting. So this could be in like a childhood environment where the adults were the unadulterated, like end all be all. That kind of children are to be seen and not heard. Don't talk back. You don't know what you're talking about. My way or the highway. You know, those kind of environments that I think were quite common in boomer parents. And so that leads to this kind of, projection onto authority figures or influential people that we might always be battling to get our view across, to be seen, to be heard, to be respected. And we're replaying out this childhood and parent dynamic, but now in school, in work, in various other things. You're not doing this consciously. This would be a subconscious thing. But so without even realizing it, you are perceiving the behavior or the boss, or possibly even you got into this situation because something in this kind of authority figure was familiar to you. And what was familiar was this sort of domineering, dominant kind of way of being. So there's always two parts to all of those conversations. So if that was the case, that this is happening and you're now finding this in a work environment or a friend group or something, this is triggering those old wounds. And it's very possible that that was happening around the time you got chickenpox. So the body says, oh, we've done this before. This has happened before. And it reignites the virus. So another driver is that in your life, to receive validation or recognition, you overcompensate by taking on too much responsibility. So in an effort to receive those things, those needs that you have, validation, recognition, you try to take on you overtake responsibility, and you caretake, or I'll do this and I'll do that and I'll do that. And you overwhelm yourself as a way to get this validation that you feel that you desperately need. And tied into that is oftentimes this person or you or whoever is doing this frequently feels the need for advice, approval, or validation for choices, feelings, or decisions. So this may be somebody that growing up the perception was, or it could have been very well said, that you as a child, you're not trustworthy, you don't understand enough, you're going to make a bad choice. This sometimes happens when people are overparented, helicopter parented, or smothered, some of the words that we say. And what that does in the child is that it makes them feel incompetent and they have competency issues. So they tend to go to other people, and it's really the outsourcing of power. They will feel the need for advice, or to make any decision, they need to get someone else's approval. Someone else needs to be on board. Someone else needs to tell them what to do for them to feel like whatever decision they make is the good one. And these people tend to rather talk about their problems than actually do anything. So it's kind of this thing about wanting to connect with people through the commonality of problems. So these people will talk about the problem and talk about the problem and have the problem and continue to have the problem and continue to talk about it. Now, overall, these people wouldn't say that they don't want solutions, but this is the type where you give solutions and they don't work, or you don't really understand. And it seems that if you're working with these people or you're in relationship with these people, it's almost like they don't want a solution. Well, actually, partially subconsciously, that's true. They don't want a solution. They don't want a solution. What they want, what they hope, is that someone will rescue them. Someone other than them will come in and take care of this. Now that goes back to childhood, where they were pretty well convinced that they're incompetent. So as an adult, it serves them more. They feel safer if someone else makes the decisions for them. Now that's a really hard thing to reconcile as an adult. But if you deeply have that program, then that's probably what's happening. And again, guys, this is all subconscious. We don't know that these things are happening. The other thing is, even if it's brought to our attention, you're watching this, you're like, oh my gosh, I think that's me. Sounds like my childhood. That sounds like what's happening to me in adulthood. The awareness of a program doesn't necessarily make it go away, but awareness sometimes is the first step. So being aware of this just lets you know you've got a lot of stuff in there that needs to be rewired. And hey, listen, maybe not a lot. Maybe you've got a few things that need to be rewired in there. It's nobody's fault. Nobody's to blame. That's what happened. And so we need to go back and we need to change those things. Okay, another driver that is typical to people who do shingles is that you tend to keep your true emotions and feelings under wrap. And what we call that in my line of work is dissociation. And dissociation is not necessarily a bad thing, especially when you're a child and you're in a situation that you don't have agency to change. You don't have an ability to get out of. And so rather than be in your body, feeling it all, making meaning of it, we have this beautiful ability to dissociate, meaning we can almost inhabit more of our mind and live more in our mind than we are our body. And in that way, we don't feel as much maybe what's happening to our body. Same thing can happen the other way around. If you're being maybe emotionally manipulated, or maybe you grew up with a narcissist as a parent and they're really messing with your mind a lot, it may be easier a little bit to dissociate into your body, to have just really be like, and we'll find these are the children who possibly cut themselves, who might self-harm, who might do things, to just really what they're doing is searching as a way to numb out. And if they have some agency over what they're feeling, that's the only way that they feel like they can have any sort of say in what's happening to them. So how that translates into adults is those adults tend to be the ones that don't feel their feelings, that aren't very in touch with emotions. And again, on a biological level, that suppresses our immune system. So that again makes us more susceptible to viruses and other things that are around us. So another driver for these people is possible that you have, as an adult, a bunch of abandoned dreams or goals or hobbies, right? You've abandoned all of those things to take care of or provide for others. And again, this is a form of dissociation. We're dissociating from our true self and putting ourselves out there just for everybody else. And sometimes what the shingles virus is doing is asking you to reconnect to your passion, sometimes to reconnect to your childhood, to remember who you are and what you loved and what you were all about and the things that made you shine. Maybe asking you to come back to a little bit more play, a little bit more freedom. So oftentimes we're like, shingles, the pain. But really, for some people, what this virus is doing is asking you to come back. It's offering you an opportunity to reevaluate and to possibly revisit a childlike way of dealing with things in a good way. Another driver is that you may have a belief that to be happy, to be well, to do well, to be strong, that you have to endure hardships. Like, unless we've gone through hardships, it must not be worth it. Or unless something is really hard and I've had to work really hard and there's blood and there's sweat and there's tears, then what I've done isn't worth anything. Or I can't really be happy. Or it's not okay to just be happy, 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 happy. There must be a hardship right around the corner. Okay, so remember that goes back a little bit to that hypervigilance in childhood that we spoke about, which is a driver for chickenpox. I want to talk a little bit about secondary gains. So a secondary gain, meaning this is something we get from the thing that we're doing. So this is, I think possibly a secondary gain could be this of shingles is this callback to play, passion, childhood a little bit. That could be a secondary gain. But another secondary gain is that you may only feel able to be vulnerable or ask for help if you're sick. And if you absolutely cannot do it yourself, and I wouldn't be asking unless I absolutely couldn't do it for myself. And so in that way, the virus is actually helping you to receive support, helping you get those needs met, helping you get that care that you desperately seek. Yet another secondary gain could be a self-sabotage strategy. So if you have a deeply wired belief that if you were to succeed or excel, that would only lead to you being exposed to more expectations or possibly even more influential people who would try to take your power away again. So you may want to consciously be successful and get ahead or really be an expert in whatever field and be promoted or whatever that is for you to succeed. But there's this other driving force, this subconscious force that says, if you do, you know what that means. It's going to be more work, more responsibility, more things to worry about, more people looking over your shoulder, whatever that is. So that subconscious program that you may not even be aware of, consciously might, I'm trying to, and I can never get ahead, and I'm always bypassed by this, and I always have this kind of boss, or I never can get ahead in my job. Well, oftentimes then there's a self-sabotage program at play that you're not aware of. Now, shingles can be very painful. But again, in many ways, it's just calling attention to pain that is already there and has been there, just buried beneath the surface. Now, again, the side of the body and the location of the particular rash that shingles is being represented by can give us further insight. But your body is always speaking. And again, the way out of this condition, as with most instances of dis-ease in the body, is by going inside the mind, inside the subconscious programming that helped us develop these conditions in the first place. What we would go after in mind change is those initial received or perceived messages from parents or caregivers that communicated a lack of support. And when we rewrite and rewire those messages, we can input something different there. In the end, our goal is always going to be to put the power back where it belongs, back in you. And this means that you will be able to be the biggest support for you. So I look forward to seeing you every other week as we dive into this fascinating topic. Please make sure to continue to leave those 5-star reviews and comment on our pages or on Instagram or YouTube to let us know if there's a disease or an ailment or a condition that you would like to hear covered. And also remember, if you sign up for the podcast newsletter, you can get 10% off of private one-to-one sessions with one of our qualified practitioners. Until next time, thanks for joining us on the Mind Change Podcast, where we are changing the world one mind at a time.